your personal and professional development, and in your power to produce solutions to problems. And you will always have a source of economic security. Your security does not come from your job or from the patronage of other people. It comes from your ability to meet needs and solve problems. Keep investing in those abilities, and you will have endless opportunities.
That profound wisdom was read by the author of those words, Stephen Covey, the author of The Eighth Habit, From Effectiveness to Greatness. He's the best-selling author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he's written several other phenomenal books, including The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Families. And it is a great privilege to have one of my mentors, even though we haven't met yet, on the show. Stephen Covey, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Bob. I'm thrilled to be with you.
Okay, let me start by asking you the question: is expecting greatness too much to ask of ourselves?
Absolutely not, because it's kind of like I think it was Goethe that said, "Treat a man as he is, and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he will become what he can and should be." I think the very mental expectation that we communicate to another person also affirms their deep internal sense of their worth and potential.
So how we communicate to another person can liberate or at least support the great potential within them.
Absolutely, and particularly if you separate them and their potential from their behavior, so that if you're upset with their behavior for some reason, you deal with that differently than communicating their worth and potential as a person. For instance, you might say, "I want you to know, son, that how much I think of you and what your great potential is. What you did here did not work, and it affected your little sister in a negative way." That way you're giving feedback on the behavior, and you've separated the behavior from the person.
That seems so difficult to do when we carry around an unconscious mindset that causes us to feel threatened by other people's behavior.
And that usually comes from ourselves being more concerned with other people's opinions of us than it does from being concerned for the real welfare and the development of the potential of our children.
Did you ever make that shift yourself? Was there a pivotal point in your life where your consciousness shifted from concern for gaining certain or everyone's approval to a focus on your own path?
Yes, it was a time when I was speaking on this subject at an IBM Executive Development headquarters up in Armonk, New York, and I was thinking about one of my sons whose behavior was embarrassing to us socially, athletically, academically, and we were essentially trying to kind of teach him, PMA, positive mental attitude, and you can do it, and we were trying to psych him up and protecting him from the kind of the ridicule he'd get from his brothers and so forth. And while I was teaching, I started to think about maybe the real problem is not in our boy, but in our perception of him, our paradigm of him. And I went home and shared my impression with my wife, Sandra, and she agreed with me, and we then began to explore our own motives. Why is it we maintain this paradigm and this approach? And we concluded that it was partly because we were trying to win social approval out of our kids' good behavior. Particularly in the work that I'm in, people are always looking at my kids and wondering how things are working out with all that I teach and so forth. And when we explored that motive in depth, we felt it was so unworthy and so kind of contrary to the concept of valuing him for his intrinsic worth. So we had to work on ourselves before we attempted to work on him. And gradually, we literally changed our whole motive toward him, and our paradigm toward him became one of, he's got tremendous potential that we are not even aware of, and that we should get out of his way and affirm him and spend more time one-on-one with him and not use any comparison language and or even comparison thinking in our own heads. And little by little, this paradigm affected not only us, but then him powerfully. He started to feel his own worth and potential. He stopped making comparisons. Then he started performing in amazing ways. But the interesting thing was that we didn't care so much the great record he was making socially, academically, and athletically, the very three areas that he was so embarrassing before, because we had changed our whole motive structure toward him, and we no longer got a sense of our own worth from his behavior. And I'm glad to have learned that, because we have a large family, and we started to apply the same idea to every one of our children. And we started having more one-on-one time. We avoided any form of comparison. Or, why aren't you more like your brother? He'll apply himself, and you don't do it like you should. And I can't understand this. But even if you think it in your mind or in your heart, they'll feel it. That's why you have to really work inside out on yourself, so that your own security comes from your own integrity toward this value system that I'm talking about now, and not from people's opinions or approval of you.
And I think that's so key for directing our own lives as adults. I think what we need to recognize is when we are feeling motivated to prove ourselves to anyone or to impress anyone, even people from our past, and just let other people's opinion go. It's beyond our circle of influence.
Right, and I think that's why your mission statement is splendid, because
thank you.
There's a kind of a social ecology there between your own growth, their development and growth, and the family culture, and how that family can actually influence other families for good and get its own sense of worth from actually influencing people for good, rather than from being compared to other people.
Stephen Covey, author of The 7 Habits from Effectiveness to Greatness and best-selling author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you've been astoundingly successful in your career. And I'm curious what are your thoughts on what you feel today is the most disintegrating influence upon families?
I think that one of the major ones is pornography. I think it's the drug of the 21st century.
Wow.
I think it is more destructive to people's minds and spirits than anyone has any idea of.
And do you mean even like risque visuals in a television advertisement?
Absolutely. Anything that offends your sense of virtue and your conscience. People should avoid it, and like a poison. I think another tremendously powerful, what I call a metastasizing cancer, that just spreads itself throughout your whole body, mind, and spirit, and then in all your relationships and the whole culture, are what I call the 5 C's. The spirit of criticizing, of complaining, of comparing, of competing, and of contending. Contending means anger.
Yeah, that contentious, bickering attitude you see in marriages. I'd like you to just talk a little bit further, because you certainly caught me off guard. I don't recall ever reading you speaking about pornography. In what way do you believe it to be so insidious?
I think that it numbs your spirit, and it is deeply... people inwardly know that it is wrong. Inwardly they do. But they gradually become kind of immune to that. And as their own conscience becomes kind of eradicated by this habit pattern, I think it affects their integrity in other parts of their life. And they get more defensive, they rationalize more, they live in compartments, they don't think social ecologically like you're trying to nurture in your program. And I think they get more defensive. I think that most anger is guilt overflowing when provoked by a small weakness in another person.
Say that again. Most anger
is guilt overflowing when provoked by a small weakness in another person.
Wow. Can you talk about that a
Well,
little?
for instance, let's say that a parent overreacts to a child. I think it's because that parent is losing integrity in other parts of his or her life. And so this guilt grows up inside them. Their conscience has been wounded, and they don't have peace of conscience. And so when there's a child does some stupid thing or some small weakness, or their spouse is kind of impatient or they're critical or something like that, then they really lose it. They overreact, and they really take it out on another and wound the tender feelings of their spouse or of a child.
So might it be a practical step to, when you experience yourself feeling angry, to ask yourself, what do I feel guilty about?
I think that's tremendous. I really do. Look inside. It's kind of like the psalmist put it, search your own heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of your life. I believe that deeply.
Well, one of the things, most valuable things I got from reading your book, The Eighth Habit, From Effectiveness to Greatness, which is I marvel at your ability to bring deep spiritual principle and higher consciousness into a corporate setting that has just launched you into, gaining the trust of these individuals who are in charge of such major organizations and companies. You talked about the power of modeling, and I came away from that feeling that however I function in a relationship, I am modeling for the other person, and that the other person is to some degree led to function at the same level. Am I reading too much into what you said?
No, you captured the essence of that, because we're always modeling everything that we do and say, and most people are looking, and they're sensing, and they're kind of feeling the power, almost like osmosis, of that modeling. And what you are really communicates far more eloquently than anything you say. And if people would realize that and say, I've got to work on my integrity, I've got to work on my absolute trustworthiness. In fact, in my mind, peace of conscience is far greater than peace of mind. Peace of conscience is more an internal thing, where you inwardly just sense you're living true to what you know is right. Peace of mind is more an external thing. You paid off your mortgage, and the weather's getting better, and you can have sleep, and you're stress-free from certain external forces and so forth. But peace of conscience is the supreme thing to go for. And that's where you have the capacity to be more patient, to be more kind naturally, to not compare yourself with other people, and I think it's a source of wisdom as well. You really have good judgment. You're not going to overreact. You have a sense of proportion. You see things as part of a whole. Everything is interdependent. It's a social ecological paradigm.
Yeah, I think once we get into a low level of functioning, if we're unconscious, we become more and more aggressive in trying to change the other person, while our aggressiveness is changing the person into ourselves.
Exactly. And it comes from our own fighting the war within ourselves, and that's why we take it out on other people.
You, in your work, you deal, I know that you're very successful in a monetary sense, and you deal with many people with lots and lots of money. And you talk in your book about mission and margin. And I'm wondering, are there certain challenges to a peaceful conscience when you're making lots and lots and lots of money?
I think there are. I think in the way you make it, and also in the way you use it. And oftentimes there are more challenges to that person than to the one who isn't making money.
Could you talk about those challenges?
Well, for instance, how do you make that money? Does it come from economic justice? In other words, are you honest in all of your business dealings with other people? Is the nature of your product or service one that really uplifts them and makes them independent of you, not more dependent upon you, so that they become, in a sense, more sustainable and great in their own right, and less focused upon looking to you as the source of their energy or the source of their affirmation, see? So that they literally grow independent of you. Then they can become interdependent with you. You can both choose to be part of a team. That's why I don't want disciples, and I don't like groupies and any form of kind of psychological nourishment that comes from other people's telling me how great I am and so forth. And
how do you avoid falling into that trap?
I think that if your mission focuses upon service and getting your family to serve other families, then it is a much larger vision than this psychological need for affirmation. And so you kind of subordinate it. You don't even think about it. You're not worried about it too much, but you are trying to make people independent of you. I try to teach principles, not practices. And that way they become more independent because the principles are timeless and universal. But if you teach practices, they become more dependent upon you, and they thank you. Oh, thank you for that practice. That really helped me. Or they say, it didn't help me. What do you want to tell me now?
But don't you, I find it, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine.
But, I find in my seminars, and I'm sure you do as well, that I totally agree with you as far as that principles are really the answer that we need. But individuals are saying, are demanding, some individuals are demanding practices. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, I find the same thing. They want them. They want some specific things that they can do to resolve their issue,
and they don't even listen to the answer.
The problem with that is that you don't know enough about them. And the practice you prescribe may not be applicable to their situation at all. And so what I like to do is to teach a principle and then teach two opposite practices that illustrate that principle, and then leave them with the responsibility to make their own judgment as to what practice will work with them. So if I ever give a story, I'll always tell an opposite type of story, so that it leaves the listener a little kind of confused initially, but then they realize, wait a minute, he's trying to give me principles, not practices. And here are two illustrations of the same principle applied differently. I have to make the choice. Do you have
a quick example of that? If not, we can move on to another question. But do you have something that wouldn't take too much time to give us an example of what you just discussed?
Well, someone may say, how should I discipline my son? Because he's just kind of rebellious and erratic. And I would say, well, remember that discipline comes from the word discipled. So one way to do it is to just be a good example and a good model of it. Another way would be to learn how to give feedback in a way that does not in any way hurt your relationship, but still gives a very strong, powerful message to your child. And so the person says, well, which would you recommend? Well, you have to decide by looking carefully at your relationship with your son to decide, is it modeling a good behavior, or would it be better to model giving feedback? Then that person is a little confused. They don't like the answer that much, but you say, it's far better for you to learn how to fish than for me to give you a fish. That's that quote I used to use all the time.
Yep. Yeah, another one of your famous ones is you could be so busy climbing a ladder, you might find out when you reach the top it's been leaning against the wrong wall. That was yours too. Brilliant. I have a question for you, and maybe you can answer this in a couple of minutes. Your book is about leadership, the eighth habit, from effectiveness to greatness, and it's about liberating the voice, the true voice, the greatness, the passion, the enthusiasm of others as the key to really good leadership. And I find that these principles can certainly be applied to leadership in any context, leading your family to greatness, and also leading your own life. Have you worked with individuals that were in a very down and out situation? I know that I get emails from our listeners at times where they're either very, very deeply in debt. They just feel like they bet on a horse and it ran the wrong way, from a line from a Dylan song. Have you discussed your principles, your approach with people like that? What would you say to someone who really feels like they're at the bottom and the bottom is shaking? The bottom looks like it might even drop out.
Right. I would basically first try to build a relationship with them so they would be open to my teaching this idea. And that is that their long-run security does not lie in their circumstances. It lies in their character.
Wow.
And they can go to work on that.
You just nail it. You just nail it.
That's been helpful to me. By the way, you asked, on this wealth thing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't answer the second part of your question, and that is, it's the use of the wealth that's the key. And that is, do you see it as a stewardship, and are you using it to bless other people's lives? Or are you using it to make an impression on people and have all these status figure symbols all around you so that people think you're so great, see?
What are the consequences of misusing it?
Well, then I think that you model the wrong behavior, for one thing, and your kids grow up, in a sense, kind of chained by wealth and riches rather than dedicated to serving other families and other people. I think it also is a misuse of the resources that you have been blessed with in a very dramatic way. And not only is it bad modeling, but you're not serving other people and you're not contributing to society, and you're just enlarging yourself. And no one on their deathbed wished they spent more time making money. They always talk about the quality of their relationships, their family, and the effort to add value to other people's lives. That's the essence of that 8th Habit book, is that, and I think that parenting, the best definition of parenting, in my opinion, is that you communicate the worth and potential of every one of your children and your spouse so clearly they come to see it in themselves. And the greatest way you model that is the way you treat your spouse. When they see that unity and harmony and that profound respect and kindness, they begin to say, that's the way, I should live my life. They just kind of absorb it by osmosis in their own family culture.
Well, Stephen Covey, you have definitely fit the bill here. I want to thank you so much for being on the program. I've actually worked for over a year trying to make this thing happen because you are so busy traveling all over, and I want to thank you so much.
Well, I'm so honored to be invited, and I think you've got a tremendous mission that you're about, and I think that the more you can really fulfill that mission, you'll find this piece of conscience will become your strongest asset that you have. And I admire what you're trying to do, so I appreciate the privilege of interacting with you, Bob.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Is there a website that you'd like people to go to?
It's they can get www.the8thhabit.com or just stephencovey.com.
Okay.
And gives my schedule. It gives all kinds of stuff on it.
And the book is available everywhere, and it is a must-read. And thank you so much for being on the program. That's about all the time we have for today.
Appreciate talking
so
much
you, sir.
to your audience. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.